ANZAC, that most Australian of words. Yet it's clearly not English. It's the title of our National Day. We see it on war memorials that are such a ubiquitous feature of the Australian landscape. But where did this unusual word come from? The word ANZAC began as an acronym, an abbreviation formed from the initial letters of another word and pronounced as a word. The acronym was still in its infancy when history intervened and the word evolved from an acronym to a proper noun. The acronym ANZAC, all in uppercase letters, A&NZAC, was created in Egypt within weeks of the Australian Imperial Force arriving on the banks of the Nile in December 1914. The Australian Imperial Force, often referred to simply as the AIF, was the fighting contingent that we had sent to help Britain in the Great War. On arrival in the Middle East, it came under the command of British headquarters in Cairo and is there that we find the origin of that acronym. At the outbreak of the war, Australia had promised a contingent of 20,000 men, comprising an infantry division of about 15 to 18,000 and a light horse brigade plus support units. When the war broke out, volunteering for the AIF was greeted with such enthusiasm that quota was filled very, very rapidly. Indeed, when the Australians left Albany in November of 1914, they had a complete division, brigade of light horse, support troops, plus a spare brigade of infantry. And part of that first Australian convoy was the New Zealand Expeditionary Force, comprising 2 brigades. When they arrived in Egypt, the Brits set them up in a tented encampment at the base of the pyramids and combined them. So we had these 2 divisions, the 1st Australian Division and the NZ&A Division, the New Zealand and Australian Division. When 2 divisions are combined, they create a military formation called a corps, spelt C-O-R-P-S. So what we've got is the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, and some anonymous British khaki military clerk running out of pen nibs writing the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps made the abbreviation ANZAC, and the name stuck. The ANZAC, the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, was still training in Egypt when it became an essential inclusion into the British-led Mediterranean Expeditionary Force. That was the force tasked with invading Ottoman Turkey, the Gallipoli Peninsula, so that they could reopen the Dardanelles. The Australian and New Zealand Army Corps, the ANZAC, landed before dawn on the 25th of April 1915 in a little cove halfway up the peninsula. Tragically, the campaign bogged down. It became a bloody stalemate, with the invaders unable to capture the peninsula and the defenders unable to drive them out. 2 distinct beachheads evolved. The beachhead, principally controlled by the Australians and New Zealanders, extended inland from the original cove for 2 ridgelines and then stretched from the southern promontory, then north past Ari Banu and along the beach towards Suvla Bay. This area became known as ANZAC. So the acronym for the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps became the name of their first battlefield. By the latter stages of the campaign, the men who were enduring those siege-like conditions began to call themselves ANZAC. Battle had welded and tempered those young men who, until a few months before, had been a collection of volunteers in uniform, into hardened veterans who saw their units as home and the mates who fought beside them as family. They called themselves ANZACs, and they spelt it with an uppercase A and a lowercase NZACS. It was a proper noun. The word ANZAC proved an identity. It was embraced both by the soldiers at the front and by their family and friends at home. That identity articulated itself into literature, and towards the end of the Doom campaign, the great Australian historian and participant observer of the AIF, Charles Bean, began to encourage veterans of the Gallipoli campaign to contribute articles, poems, short stories, artworks for a publication. It went to print in early 1916 under the title The Anzac Book. The term was incorporated into the titles not only of souvenirs but of publications like the books that recorded the names of the heroic dead that families back in Australia purchased as memento mori. These Anzac memorial books were produced annually, long after the Gallipoli campaign had ended. By 1916, that tiny force of one division that created the AIF had grown into a force of 5 combat divisions. The Australian soldiers fighting the war began to address each other as ANZAC, regardless of whether they had served on Gallipoli or not. And they spelt it with an uppercase A and a lowercase NZAC. It became a collective identifier, even a form of address. In 1934, the Anzac Memorial in Hyde Park was completed. The memorial had been planned as early as 1916. It had been confirmed by an Act of Parliament in 1923, the Anzac Memorial Act. As we can see from the title of the Act of Parliament, the name is written as the noun, an uppercase A followed by the lowercase letters. It is clear that the memorial was not created to commemorate the Corps, but instead to be a place of silent contemplation for the men and women from this state who called themselves Anzacs. Since the Great War, the word Anzac has grown in power and resonance. When Australians and New Zealanders got to fight side by side again during the campaign in Greece and the battle on Crete in April and May 1941, they were very proud to call themselves an Anzac force. During the war in Vietnam, the New Zealand Army sent 2 rifle companies to serve with several of the Australian battalions, and these battalions rejoiced in the title of ANZAC. The power of the word grows and continues to be used by Australian service personnel. It's time that a new generation understood that word, ANZAC. It's a word that has come to stand for the values of courage, endurance and sacrifice.